What's up, y'all? This is Neena Perez, and this is Straight Talk, no sugar added. And you know that I go around this planet seeking the best people on it to come on here, grow, challenge, and transform your thinking. And today I found Mark Young. I think this is going to be such a fun episode. He's an entrepreneur, an educator, a marketer, a philanthropist, and the author of a book called Date Your Clients: Building Professional Equity from Life's Worst Personal Strikeouts. I already love that, right? And so what I love too, Mark, is when I was reading the bio sheet that was sent over, it said if there was ever a person existed who can point out everything that is wrong with anything, you just found them. And I'm like, oh, we're gonna have fun.
It's a
Mark,
true
I
statement,
love
Neena,
that.
and I've lived to regret it.
I bet, right? But you know what? I love straight talkers. And that's what that sounded like to me when I was reading it. I'm like, I bet you
Right.
he just tells it like it is. And that's just that. So, Mark, welcome to Straight Talk. How are you?
I am doing amazingly well, Neena. Thank you so much
Good.
for asking, and thanks for having me here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. So, I know I gave just a little bit about you, but why don't you share a little bit more about who Mark is, and then we'll go from there.
Oh gosh, I don't find me that interesting. See, well, you had me on here because of a book I recently wrote. So that kind
Mhm.
of I'll back into a bit of an introduction there and say,
Okay.
I actually own an advertising and marketing agency based here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And Date Your Clients, which is the book that I recently published, is actually I hate to even say this, it started as an email to a client and turned into a book. So maybe
Mhm.
I'm long winded, or maybe I just had a lot to say to this client. But
Yeah.
but nevertheless, here we are. And so, yes, I work in the world of advertising and marketing every single day. So
Mhm.
you mentioned that I'm an entrepreneur, and I said, yes, I am, but I get to spend my day sitting in front of other entrepreneurs, which means I don't know if that means that I get to do entrepreneurship better or worse.
Right.
But it means that I get to see every possible way that things could be better. And I make a point of pointing them out because that's what they pay me to do, right?
Right. Right.
So people bring me their brands, they bring me their life savings sometimes and say, I've got everything I own invested in this brand. What should I do? So that makes the responsibility steep for me to give them straight answers
Mhm.
because sometimes they don't have the time and sometimes they don't have the money for sugarcoating.
Right. Right.
So
Right. No. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
it's like the doctor that comes in and says, this is the
Mhm.
problem. We need to operate today. Like you may not like that answer, but it may save your life.
Right. Now, was marketing something that you've always been into, or how did you get into that?
Well,
Yeah.
I'll give credit to my father on that. And I will say he's actually owned his own advertising agency for about 30 plus years, very well established in the field and well respected. So I was around it most of my life, but actually I spent most of my career in higher education.
Oh.
So I went from college professor to administrator, and I've had about 7 careers, I think, but got into that. And truthfully, the bureaucracy of higher education drove me right out of my mind and right out of the industry.
Yeah.
Because when it comes to if you have an entrepreneurial mindset, the reality is you don't want to mess around with all the nonsense.
That's right.
Like there's nothing like an entrepreneur to me up because I make a point of trying not to talk to middle management people at my clients' offices because I will frustrate them and they will frustrate me. And I often find myself in a position that if I'm talking to them, they'll say things like, but he or she or whoever, meaning the owner or CEO, doesn't understand.
Right. Right.
And I find
Right.
myself often going, I know it feels that way,
Mhm.
but if
Mhm.
you'll take it from someone who's not part of the problem, let me explain why your boss does the things that he does or why she does
Mhm.
the things that she does, because there's a reason that that person is reacting that way. And you think she's ignoring the problem, but in fact, it's because she's got 3 bigger problems than this one to pay
Right.
attention to
Right.
and just doesn't have the bandwidth to get to what you're talking about right now. So please don't feel neglected. She has other things going on. And and it reminds me, and again, the book is called Date Your Clients, but it reminds me of relationships, right? Like we feel
Mhm.
like we're being ignored. And
Mhm.
I'm sure you've been in a relationship in the past where that your better half is feeling ignored right now, and you're like, look, I'm not mad at you, I'm not even disappointed with you, you've done nothing wrong, my head is just in the office,
Right.
like
Right. Right.
I'm
Right.
busy, and you can't take that as an offense. And it gets down to that communication point. So those types of illustrations and those types of conversations that I have on a regular basis have what inspired each chapter here. As I somewhat tongue-in-cheek with a real snarky voice walk through some of these disasters, and I will say also admit a lot of things I probably shouldn't have in a book. But
it's out now. It's out now, Mark. Ain't nothing you can do about it.
I know a lot. I know it's in black and white now. I'm stuck with all these embarrassing stories I just shared.
It's awesome. So was entrepreneurship something you've always been though, or did you work before in corporate or in company, or it's always been? Okay.
I come from a family of business owners. It's that immigrant mindset that, you come in and you figure out a way to do it. And that's been my entire family. So I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. So being around the entrepreneurship's not weird. And I've owned businesses of my own since I was 16 years old.
That's awesome.
So when I went into higher ed, I worked in a very large corporate environment. So I've climbed the corporate ladder, and I was the COO at a $250 million education firm before leaving there because I just had enough.
Right.
To get down in the nitty gritty and, get dirty in the trenches with my clients and my own businesses, and we get to have fun now. So I'll tell you, I'd rather wear blue jeans to work every day of the week.
Yeah, it's good. So was that something, well, you said you were kind of done with it. So, I think what's interesting too is that you have already grew up in a family with entrepreneurs, right? So was this like a natural transition for you to say, you know what, I'm done with this and let me just get into entrepreneurship?
That's a cool question. So here's what I'll say to you, and that is if your audience, and the one thing I didn't ask you ahead of time, Neena, and that's on me, was who's your audience? Like who's the people that we're typically talking to on this podcast? But I'll assume that you've got an entrepreneurial type audience as well, who are business people. And the one thing, and they resonate with me because first of all entrepreneurs are absolutely batshit crazy.
Right.
Because there's nothing about this that makes sense.
Right.
And I say, we show up every day and put it all on black and spin the wheel and see what happens today, because either I'll get wealthy or lose everything I own. But there's zero comfort in what we do. Right. So in that respect, when I'm working with my clients, it's very natural. But part of being an entrepreneur, I'll say, is it's being able to identify a problem and then solving it. And that's how most businesses begin. Someone identifies a problem and they find a way to fix it. And then their audience naturally becomes whoever had that problem, right?
Right.
So if I'm the person who created the solution, then I know who my audience is. It's everyone who has the problem. So from an entrepreneurial standpoint, that's always been part of my blood. Right. So even when I worked in the corporate world, I will say that my success always came from finding the problem and solving it. And I think the frustration that I had if I were working in corporate America, fortunately, I worked in an organization for many years that very much loved that side of me, because it was a for-profit private educational company.
Oh, yeah. Good.
So it was more, it wasn't I did work in the state schools and stuff too, and I hated it. But when I got to the for-profit world in the private side of things, what I loved about it is that it was students first. It was not institution first.
Right.
So we trained students, we got students' degrees, we got students' jobs, and we were able to solve problems. And in that respect, I loved what I did because it was business, it was education. I got to literally watch students' lives change because they did things, because we didn't offer liberal arts degrees and stuff like that. They were very career-focused degrees.
Oh, good.
So I loved that. And what I loved about it was there was still the opportunity that we would often have problems arise where we needed to solve something. And I'll give you an example and say, like, we'd have transfer students who would come to our organization, and, we would have our education team want to go through and say, well, we need to do, credit evaluations. And I'm like, look, the guy had a math class. We tell him he needs a math class. Like, what is it you're trying to compare here? And sometimes the educators have just spent hours and hours trying to make, and I'm like, let the kid graduate and start working. Go get him a job.
Right.
Like, solve the problem. So I'd find myself signing off on transcript evaluations and stuff like that, trying to help students actually go succeed. And I will say that's entrepreneurial in many
Yeah.
respects because
Yeah.
you see a problem and you go fix it.
Right.
So when I left that arena, this is the funny thing, Neena, is I left that arena and I moved back to Michigan for a short period of time, which is where I'm originally from, and just figured, you know what, I lived in Fort Lauderdale, which is how I got down here to begin with. I'm like, I'm just gonna go figure out what I want to do. Like, I don't
Yeah.
even know.
Right.
My dad called me and said, we've got this large client that needs some help. Um, since you're kind of on your own freelancing right now, I don't suppose I could get you to short term help me manage this project. I'm like, yeah, whatever, sure. Um, it didn't take 2 to 3 months from like, this is the client's biggest problem. Like they have an issue in this area, and it wasn't something my dad's business did. And I'm like, so I started a business and started fixing it. And then
That's
I
so
just,
cool.
right, find a problem,
Yeah.
solve it. And
Right.
ultimately, as a business owner, I will say that that's the employee I love best.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Is
mm-hmm.
a person who's not sitting around and saying, where's the policy? Can you show me the instruction books? Where's my job description? Like,
Yeah.
find a problem and fix it. No one,
Right.
no
Right.
one gets fired if you just find
Right.
problems and fix them, right? Like those
Right.
people are never worried about their jobs.
Yeah, there's something to be said about that, right? And I think that
Mhm.
more people think, like, as some people that I've spoken to are like, "Oh, I'm not an entrepreneur," but they're always creating. They're more entrepreneurial than they think they are, you know?
Mhm.
I did have a question for you though. What made you go into like education and doing all of that? Because you were having your own entrepreneurship track, right? Since you were 16 years old. So
Mhm.
did you get kind of sick of trying to find the next client, and did that get tiresome, and then you wanted like a steadiness, if you can call it steadiness, right? And a paycheck, or what was, I just want to know where your mind was at.
Interesting. Yeah. So I ran my own business when I was 16, and I ended up selling it when I was 23. And I went to college part time because you don't go to college full time while you're doing all that kind of stuff. So at
Okay.
23, I was like, you know what? I need to really hunker down and graduate from college already. Right. So I didn't graduate with my undergrad till I was 25. But I got a job. Like I'd owned my own business. I sold it. I went and I got a job. And of all the crazy things, I got a job working in an accounting office.
Hmm.
And in the accounting office, I really learned the back end of business, right? But I laughingly say that my first job, they used to call me, my first real job, they called me the finance marine. And the reason was it was for a nonprofit based in Detroit, and I would go from department to department and troubleshoot.
Oh.
So the finance department, it was the craziest job, but they just kind of used me for what I was good at. And here I am. I had an accounting background kind of from college, and they would send me to each department to go figure out what was going on with state grants and what was going on with cash collections and why the profit loss statement in that department never made sense. And so I would go spend a couple months in one department, figure it all out, bring the solutions, and then I would go to the next department. I do the same
Mm-hmm,
thing. So
mm-hmm.
even then, I was being an entrepreneur, right? I didn't
Right.
I didn't
I was
know
gonna say
better.
that. Right.
Yep, I
Right.
would go from department to department, and of all the goofy things, I started writing software and all these other goofy things. To me, no one told me what to do. They just told me what needed done.
Right.
So
That's
I would
good.
I would just go reverse
Yeah.
engineer the solution, and I'd come back with the solutions. And in retrospect, I laugh because I mean I was 20 nothing years old, and I can only imagine my bosses were like, "Who is this guy?" Like, I,
Right. Right. Right.
I mean, it's so funny because in retrospect, I'm like, "Oh my god, I wish I could hire me."
Right, right. You know why, Mark? Because it sounds to me like you have that in you already, where you are the cream that rises to the top, right? I think that when people have a mindset already of like determination or looking at a problem and trying to find a solution, I think naturally you kind of start to rise in whatever positions that you're in, right?
Mhm.
Because to your point before, is like, you're not just looking at the rule book and trying to say what the rules are, and go by it, line by line. And I do like, sometimes my mind does go into rules, like I like to have like some
Yep.
stability, but I also do the same. Like every job I've gone into, I've become like the manager, the director, the whatever, very
Yep.
quickly. And it's because of that mindset that you have. So going fast forward now to dating your clients, right? it's very interesting. When as soon as I read the title, I'm like, dating your clients just makes complete sense, right? It's wanting to know who your client is, and getting to, I don't know if this is what it is about, but like getting to kind of, you already know really what to do. I think most of us already know what to do.
Yep.
Yep. And for me, it was like, even I was like a little bit like in the beginning when I started doing my own coaching practice and stuff. I'm like, but I don't know what to do. And I'm like, what are you, an idiot? You're a moron or something? Just get over
Right.
there and do it. What the heck is wrong with you?
And the thing
Right?
is,
So,
and it's the common sense stuff. It's like we've all
yeah.
dated somebody, right? We've all
Yeah.
made mistakes in relationships. We've all been in relationships with people who've made mistakes.
Right.
And my answer is, at the end of the day, while there's so many people out there, particularly entrepreneurs, who are out there wrestling with this. What do? I don't know how to do it. I need to buy another self-help book, and I need to listen to another podcast, and I need to follow 3 more motivational accounts on Instagram. And I listen to that stuff. I'm like, no, you don't. Like, until you've gotten to the end of your own ability, quit trying to add a trainer. Like, if you're not willing to go run 1 mile every day, you don't need a trainer to teach you how to run. Like, you're not even willing to do the basics. And my opinion is, when it comes to business, we know the answer to our own problems usually. And so much of it is intuitive. And so my comparison here, my juxtaposition rather, is in dating, there's a lot of things we just know, right? For instance, you don't ignore your partner and expect to call back 3 days later without having a complicated conversation.
Right.
Well,
Right.
likewise, if my client reaches out to me and needs to get a hold of me about an important topic, and I don't return his or her phone call within 3 days, there's
Right.
going to be a complicated conversation.
Right.
Like, it's not that hard to figure out, because at the end of the day, I've only ever dated humans.
Right.
And I've only ever done business with humans. So there's a correlation.
Right.
Your clients are your clients. And the truth of the matter is they're people, and they have emotions as much as they prefer not to. And as much as I don't want my emotions to get involved in business, you know what? They do.
Yeah, they do. They do.
Sometimes I'm frustrated with a client, and sometimes there's clients will do things that make me want to just fire them as a client and get frustrated and walk away. And, they'll say something in a way that bothers me. Or, for instance, I had a situation recently, and these are just my own confessions, where a client called and asked a question about a bill. And it was just phrased in such a way that it made it sound like you don't value the work we do.
Right. Right.
And to me, I was like, are you kidding me? We do so much work for you. And it's a client who probably gets the best rate out of anybody because of some other, things we do to help them. And I'm like, are you joking? And I found myself getting offended by the question.
Right.
And truthfully, he was just asking the question going, no. I just need to know, for budget purposes, this is the first time we've been billed for this. Is this going to happen every month?
Right.
Like, I'm good with the bill, but I just need to know, should I budget this in every month, or is this a one-off thing? And I think about even dating relationships in that respect. And how many times has your significant other said something to you in such a way that it was never intended to be wrong?
Right.
And it caused a fight.
Oh yeah. Listen, I'm a straight talker. So that happens. That happens more than I want to admit. You know what I'm saying?
What was funny is I've adopted it. Neena, I challenge you to do this. I've adopted this way of dealing with things, and I do it at work all the time. And I found it happening in my personal life too. Someone will say something that I probably heard correctly, but I will respond and say, wait, before you go on, Neena, what you just said caused a very negative reaction in me. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to rephrase that before I react, assuming I heard you incorrectly.
Right.
So I'm going to assume I heard that wrong and let you do a take back.
Right.
And sometimes the person is like, no, you heard me completely right.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, now you get my reaction.
Right.
But I know myself, my reactions are typically so dramatic that seriously, someone offends me and my first reaction is to hit the nuclear button.
Right.
But I know myself. So
awesome.
I never react.
Right.
doesn't
That
matter
is
what
awesome.
anybody says or does. I'm like, okay, what's the first thought that comes to your brain, Mark? Because that's probably the wrong
The
one.
wrong one. I do the same thing.
So whatever I'm thinking right now, let that not be what it comes out of my mouth.
That's
I
so
know my 3 or 4
funny.
people I can call to just complain about the world who won't judge me. Let me deal with them first.
Right.
And
Oh,
the
that
truth
is
of the
so
matter is,
funny.
it happens, but Neena, it happens
Yeah,
in business all the time.
all the time.
It happens in relationships. I mean, think about how many times you've dated somebody, and the minute something went wrong, you're like, forget it, red flag, I'm done, like this is over. And then like 3
For
hours
sure.
later, everything's fine.
That is hilarious.
You
That
know,
is so real, though. I freaking love that. It's so real. I always go, instead of doing I'm going to let you rephrase, I always say, can you help me understand what you just meant? Can you help me
great.
understand that? That is so funny. So when you are writing this book, right, are you also um, going through how to even get clients, or are you talking about existing clients?
So, well, that's a good question. So the first thing, so I'll walk you through how the book even started. And I mentioned to you that it actually started as an email to a client.
Mm-hmm.
And this email to a client was because we were having a conversation at her office. And she was like, TV advertising doesn't work. And I went, that's a pretty broad brush statement. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
that's accurate. And I'm like, I mean, perhaps it's the way your website is set up, because you're using TV to drive traffic to your website, but your website's terrible.
Right.
And you're upset that nobody's checking out. But the reality is the traffic is coming to your site.
Right.
So perhaps TV is not the problem, because TV is just introducing them to your site. Your site is broken. Nope, I don't think that's the case. And I'm like, okay, so let me give you an example. Like, for instance, imagine that you had an online dating profile. What would you put on your profile? Would you tell a potential match every possible thing there was to know about you?
Right.
Would you put pictures of how you look first thing in the morning?
Right.
I mean, would you put these things on your profile
Good.
and throw your arms in the air and say, well, the people who will love me will love me? Like, no,
Hell no.
you curate that profile, right? These
Right.
are the 5 best photos you've ever taken. These are like the words that describe only your amazing attributes.
Right.
Like you dress this up, and I'm like, because the goal is to just get somebody to swipe right. And I'm like, the issue with what's happening here on your website is no one's swiping right.
Right.
I'm like, and you don't know why, so you're just assuming that all the good ones are taken kind of mindset.
Right.
And I'm like, so here's my profile. Nobody wants to date me. It's only awful people online. Men are terrible, women are terrible, whatever. And I'm like, no, you just have an ugly profile.
Right.
Let's just call it what it is. And it was funny because and at that point she's like, well, I don't think that's accurate. And I start to explain the detailed reasons. I'm like, you know what? Rather than us have conflict here at your office, I'm going to write this down in an email. That way you can read it. And maybe as you're reading it, it'll make more sense, and you'll have more time to incubate and let that marinate a little bit at home. And then we can come back to this conversation. And she's like, that's great. That's great. So I start writing this email. So to your question, is it also about getting clients? The answer is yes, because there's a lot that happens in what I'll call the courtship process. And it depends on the type of business you're in, of course. But in my business, we deal with advertising clients. So it's usually a longer process because they're trying to vet us. They want to make sure it's a high ticket item. They're trusting their business to us. They're not trying to sell us an ice cream cone, right?
Right.
So it's a more, once we get in with a client, like, we're part of their business. So for us, it's a longer tail. It's a longer courtship.
Right.
So a lot of things go into that. But in the book, we kind of laugh through the chapters, because the first chapter is actually titled "Make 'Em Swipe Right."
Right.
And it's about everything. It's everything related to curb appeal. And literally I walk through, and I'll give you an example here, Neena. And as you go to a new client meeting, and I try to explain to you, not you specifically, but to anybody reading the book, it's, you go to a new client meeting, and it's like, to you, it's a Tuesday. To them, it's a first impression.
Right.
So if you were going on a first date, I assume that you probably spent an extra 30 minutes getting ready that night.
Right.
right? Because the way a girl shows up on a date is how I decide that's the best she's ever going to look.
Right.
Right. I mean,
Right.
that's the truth. But don't you do the same thing on a job
I
interview?
love it. That is so true.
It
That's
is.
true.
When
Yes.
you show up on a first date, I assume that is the best makeup you know how to do. I assume that's the best hairdo you could figure out. That's the best outfit you own.
Right.
Because you're trying to make an impression on me. But then you show up to a job interview looking like a slob.
Right.
And it's one of the reasons why we have a policy. We always interview people twice before we hire. And part of the reason is you can fail into a good interview once, but doing it twice takes a little bit of talent.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things, like the way you show up, it makes an impression. But if I'm going to go meet a client for the first time, how did I choose to dress that morning?
Right. Right.
How did I choose to prepare that day? How did I choose to eat breakfast that morning?
Right. Right.
So that I didn't show up hungry,
Mhm.
or that I didn't show up, feeling uncomfortable because I had a bad breakfast and now I'm preoccupied with my own digestive system. Like those things matter.
Right.
And yet to you, it's Tuesday, right? It's just another day at the office. And to this client, they're judging everything about you from that moment because it's their first exposure to you.
Right.
And then we go through the book about what's the first date look like, what's the second date look like, and some of the things about making small talk.
Yeah.
You need to know how to talk. And yet, one of my favorite phrases is the title of the book is called When 15 what's the title? When 15 minutes matters most. When minute 16 matters most. And the phrase always boils down to anybody can talk about something for 15 minutes. But after 15 minutes, people are going to figure out if you actually know what you're talking about.
Right.
And the same thing goes on a date. Like you can be charming for 15 minutes.
Right.
But when 15 minutes is up, now you better know what you're talking about. And I think,
Yeah.
have you ever been on one of those dates, Neena, when you go out and the first 15 minutes, you're like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Like you're so fun.
Oh, yeah.
You're so charming. And then, once you're done with your salad, you're like, I have completely run out of things to talk about with you. Like there's nothing left.
Right. It's almost like the smoking mirrors goes off, the smoke goes away, and then all of a sudden you kind of wake up and you're like, this actually isn't working. But it's I think, and maybe this is, I don't know where if you were heading this way, but like the 16-minute is always, it's also that client that you've had for a while. Because a lot of times we give all the hoopla and the good dressing, right, to that very first meeting. And then like our client, then we kind of like, like have them on the side because they're there already. But that's like with any relationship though, right, Mark? Because my husband and I have been married 21 years, and I still make sure that he loves the way that I look, that we go out and enjoy each other's company, things like that, because it's important. And sometimes I see that the client that you've had for a while now is just not as shiny as that new client that came in. And that's a problem too. Do you talk about that at all?
That is in the chapter titled Friday Night is Date Night.
Right.
And it talks about
how to get this book.
Existing clients.
I love it.
Existing clients need to still know they're important.
Yes.
And we still need to. And my argument is that Friday night, my dad always used a phrase that said, if we both agree on everything, one of us is unnecessary.
Right.
And
I love it.
And I agree with that. And one of the things I talk about in Friday Night is Date Night is we can be different and see the world differently. And when you talk about, what's going on with the kids and what's going on with this and that and whatnot, the reality is on Friday night, it's a time to come back and remember why we're still together. And with my clients, I really try to spend that time where here's a client I've been with forever. They've been here for years and they want to talk about how sales have plateaued.
Right.
And they want something different. But a lot of times in our industry, 2 to 3 years with an agency is a long time because the client feels that if things went well, then they must have done something right. And if things go poorly, it's because the agency didn't do something well. Right. So we're always in this weird space. So it's kind of funny because we're like, okay, like something's got to give here, right? So we're always in that weird spot. And what I'll say to that is that Friday night being date night, in my opinion, that's when the two of us get together and talk about the world. And I get to respect the way you see it, and you get to respect the way I see it, and we get to remember why we're a good match.
Right. Right.
Because
That's good.
you see the things I
Yeah.
don't, and I see the things you don't, and you
Right.
prioritize the things that I forget, and vice versa. And with my clients, it's much the same, because they may prioritize this one big thing, and I'm in the weeds going, nope, this is what we need to focus on. And then a month later, they're like, yep, you're right, you called that. When I have a client right now that their entire campaign was supposed to launch on the 1st of June. It's now July 25th, and we've still not launched. And it's because I told them in advance, this is one thing that you guys have to do.
Right.
And you need to start it now, because it's going to take a couple months to come to completion. And it's regarding their credit card processing and everything else. I'm like, this is something you need to say. They never saw it being a problem. It's not going to be an issue. Literally 2 months later, we still can't launch.
Right.
Because all of the work is done.
Right.
And I'm like, guys, but that's why you hired us. I would never tell you how to formulate your product.
Right.
But at the same time, I know how to launch a product, and you need to trust what I'm saying too. And every Thursday we get together on a conference call, and some weeks it's like, have we made any progress on this? Okay, well, it's a really short call.
Right.
But we meet.
Oh, Mark, I love that.
But we meet.
Yeah, that's good.
Even if there's nothing deep to say, we meet.
So let me talk a little bit about just a little snippet about your marketing company, though. So is there a particular type of business you like to work with? Like, do you like brick and mortars? Do you like products? Do you like coaching businesses? What do you like to work with?
So our primary bread and butter, and I will tell you, as go the leader, so goes the team, right? And I will tell you my personal interest, and one of the things that I love is I love health and fitness and all those types of things. And particularly, I do a lot of personal interest in what's called the biohack community. It's that using science to hack your health kind of thing.
Yeah.
So most of our clients are consumer-facing brands. So we're a very e-commerce based type client. So we're not necessarily a lead gen agency. We're not an agency that's giant brick and mortar type stuff. That's my dad's agency, actually. We're really e-commerce focused. So we're about transactions and internet experiences. And most of our clients fall, not all, but we find that most of our clients fall right in the health and wellness and beauty categories. And a lot of it is just, that's where a lot of my contacts are.
That's great.
What's fun about it is that not only do I get to work with people I like, but I even get to work with products that I use.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, we've just got so much cool stuff and people we work with. And to be honest with you, I'll tell you, it's a very daunting task to take on writing a book's not easy anyways, but at the same time, writing the book and knowing that I'm exposing, I don't use names or anything, but if I'm telling people this is the way I treat my clients, and my clients actually get a chance to read the book, it's pretty easy for them to be like, no.
Right.
And picture the case that you write a book about marriage and your spouse doesn't agree.
Right.
How awkward would that be? And I think that's kind of how I feel here, because I'm like, wow, I just put a whole book out there about the way that I treat my clients. And I'm like, any one of my clients could call bullshit in a minute.
Right.
And it's and the cool thing about it is my clients have actually written reviews.
Oh, that's good.
And it's been like, okay, that's cool. So it's like, I'm giving all this advice on how to treat a client. Apparently my clients agree that this is what I do. So I just got 360 feedback on this.
Right. I mean, listen, that's ballsy, right? To write that book knowing you're in the middle of it. That's amazing. And that just shows a lot about your character too. You're kind of just putting it out there, because I think at least this is how I'm feeling, Mark, is that your purpose is to help people, right? So I think that not just in your marketing business, but in your book as well, right? Like your idea was, I need to help people. And when that's the thought process, you're going to do it. Well, right.
And I want to add one thing to that, Neena, and that is one of my clients actually sent me a text message a couple of weeks ago and said, I just finished your book. And her takeaway, she's like, I'm going on Amazon to write your review right now. She goes, but I want to tell you, she goes, business books are so boring. She goes, and your book made me realize how much I hate reading boring books.
Yeah.
Because this was so fun to read.
Right.
Because I mean, the points were made. Everything was great. She goes, but I read the book in like no time flat because it was such a fun, easy read. And here's my thing, Nina. I'm there. It's funny stories, it's jokes, it's all this other kind of stuff throughout the entire thing, but the points are made.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is I just don't like life being complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and if you're an entrepreneur, like the people that you're working with, they don't really have a lot of time too to be sitting there reading all these books, right? So
100%.
yeah.
And yet they're sitting there reading these books that are exhausting to read or listening to them on tape. And it's like, to me, it's like, I like having fun with what I'm doing. And even if I'm writing a business book, teaching you how to manage relationships, like I'm going to have fun, because if it's not fun, I don't want to be part of it. And it took me a while to wrap my head around the fact that I could use my own voice and my own style to make a serious point.
That's awesome.
And it was kind of fun because I didn't have to not be me.
Right.
Do that. And even my clients know, like, I mean, we'll be on conference calls, and I mean, I'm cracking jokes. Like, it's who I am, and I'm not going to not be me. And like I said earlier in the call, like one of my professional goals is to never wear a suit to work again.
Right. Good for you, man. Good for you. So
many years.
Oh man, I love this conversation. I love who you are. I love your energy, all of it. So just to close out, I do have a large entrepreneurship population on my website. I just looked at my numbers. I think it was today that my coach called me, and I think we're at like 35,000 downloads for the month or something like that.
Oh wow, congratulations.
Thank you, which is really, really great. So I say all that to say that you are talking to a very good audience right now. So before we go, I do want you to drop your info so that if they do need a marketing person and all that, so go ahead and hit us with all of that information.
Oh, that's awesome. So first of all, I would tell people, pick up a copy of the book. It's at dateyourclients.com, or you can find it on Amazon, Date Your Clients, author Mark Young. Feel free to pick up a copy of the book. My contact information is right there, but I'm just Mark at dateyourclients.com.
That's awesome.
The name of my agency is Rise Agency, RYZE agency.com. And you're more welcome to go read more about us and what we do on that website. But the easiest one to remember is just Mark at dateyourclients.com. Straight up, easy enough to find. I manage that mailbox myself, so no one's going to get a bot replying to them. So if any of your listeners are, if they just want to have a conversation, give me a call. If any of your listeners have podcasts, give me a call. If any of your listeners are looking for a marketing partner, or they just need advice, give me a call. Like, I'm here. I gladly do this stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome, Mark. Thank you so much for being on Straight Talk. I really appreciate it. This is fun. This is a great conversation.
Thank you, Neena. It's been a blast.
Yeah, it's been a blast. Thank you guys so much for being here, listening, watching, all that great stuff that you do. I will make sure to list all of Mark's info below so that you can, reach out to him, and hopefully you can do your next gig, your next campaign, but he's going to give it to you straight. And I love that. That's why you guys listen to this anyway, because you guys are all straight talkers. So thank you guys for being here, watching, listening, all that. We love you, and we will see you next time. All right. Have a good one.